Empathy begins with understanding life from another person's perspective. Nobody has an objective experience of reality. It's all through our own individual prisms. People say that globalization has negative aspects, but I don't believe globalization is bad. It's criticized from a Western perspective, but if you put yourself in the shoes of people in the developing world, it provides an unprecedented opportunity. If one tries to think about history, it seems to me, it's like looking at a range of mountains. And the first time you see them, they look one way. But then time changes, the pattern of light shifts. Maybe you've moved slightly, your perspective has changed. The mountains are the same, but they look very different. You don't have to compose a masterpiece every time, but I think the challenge of art is always searching for something different, searching for a new sensitivity, a new perspective, a new vision. I don't go by or change my attitude based on what people say. At the end of the day, they, too, are judging me from their perspective. I would rather be myself and let people accept me for what I am than be somebody who I am not, just because I want people's approval. Perspective is worth 80 IQ points. Success is based on your perspective. I never saw an ugly thing in my life, for let the form of an object be what it may, light, shade, and perspective will always make it beautiful. It is essential to employ, trust, and reward those whose perspective, ability, and judgment are radically different from yours. It is also rare, for it requires uncommon humility, tolerance, and wisdom. Each person does see the world in a different way. There is not a single, unifying, objective truth. We're all limited by our perspective. I grew up on the west side of Detroit, 6 Mile and Wyoming, so I was really in the hood. And I would go to school at Detroit Waldorf, and that was not the hood. Growing up in Detroit was good. I had a good perspective, a well-rounded one, and not being one-sided. Leadership cannot be measured in a poll or even in the result of an election. It can only be truly seen with the benefit of time, from the perspective of 20 years, not 20 days. It's useful to go out of this world and see it from the perspective of another one. I like to say I'm determined, some people would call it stubborn. It depends on your perspective. Technology teaches passivity. Absorbed in our devices, at any age, we are absorbed in someone else's perspective. You must look within for value, but must look beyond for perspective. Mothers are supposed to listen and, afterward, to respond with some wisdom and perspective, but these things were not my mother's strong suit. What is essential in love is what the French call amour fou. What is that in English? Crazy love? That doesn't sound as beautiful. It's a total kind of love that not only embraces feelings, actions, but a kind of understanding of the world from the perspective of love. Once you put everything in the right perspective, even bad times can be an opportunity to refresh your appetite, your desire. Injuries give you perspective. They teach you to cherish the moments that I might have taken for granted before. Science is a way of life. Science is a perspective. Science is the process that takes us from confusion to understanding in a manner that's precise, predictive and reliable, a transformation. For those lucky enough to experience it, that is empowering and emotional. Compassion does not just happen. Pity does, but compassion is not pity. It's not a feeling. Compassion is a viewpoint, a way of life, a perspective, a habit that becomes a discipline, and more than anything else, compassion is a choice we make that love is more important than comfort or convenience. Resilient people recognize that no matter how bad the circumstances are, their situation could always be worse. They don't allow themselves to exaggerate how terrible their problems are, and they don't run around predicting how much worse things are going to get. Instead, they view failure with an accurate perspective. Stress is a downward spiral, and you can only overcome it with a positive perspective. What I have is a malevolent curiosity. That's what drives my need to write and what probably leads me to look at things a little askew. I do tend to take a different perspective from most people. I love flying, I love aircraft, and you could say I've had a love affair with flight since I was a child. I travel a huge amount. I use airports, and as a pilot, I've flown in and out of airports thousands of times, so really, I have a fairly broad perspective. I'm just thankful for everything, all the blessings in my life, trying to stay that way. I think that's the best way to start your day and finish your day. It keeps everything in perspective. When you wake up every day, you have two choices. You can either be positive or negative, an optimist or a pessimist. I choose to be an optimist. It's all a matter of perspective. A little perspective, like a little humor, goes a long way. Injury in general teaches you to appreciate every moment. I've had my share of injuries throughout my career. It's humbling. It gives you perspective. No matter how many times I've been hurt, I've learned from that injury and come back even more humble. From my perspective, I absolutely believe in a greater spiritual power, far greater than I am, from which I have derived strength in moments of sadness or fear. That's what I believe, and it was very, very strong in the forest. It's amazing how, over time, a person's perspective can be altered. Nothing is won on your first shift and nothing is lost on your first shift, so it's about keeping things in perspective. Having a baby is a life changer. It gives you a whole other perspective on why you wake up every day. We go to the theater to be entertained, but if what is left after you watch the movie is a sort of eye-opening perspective on some social issues, then it can be a really powerful piece of art. Being young is a great advantage, since we see the world from a new perspective and we are not afraid to make radical changes. Gratitude is one of the strongest and most transformative states of being. It shifts your perspective from lack to abundance and allows you to focus on the good in your life, which in turn pulls more goodness into your reality. The greatest tragedy for any human being is going through their entire lives believing the only perspective that matters is their own. I've always been interested in the industrialization of our food. It's been an issue for me from an environmental and animal rights and human health perspective. There are many museums dedicated to technology, artistic endeavors, music, and that sort of thing. From that perspective, I think games really do have a place as a kind of collaborative art or a synthesis of all these various aspects into a whole, and that, in itself, can be perceived as art. I like to turn things upside down, to watch pictures and situations from another perspective. A lot of people in our industry haven't had very diverse experiences, so they don't have enough dots to connect, and they end up with very linear solutions without a broad perspective on the problem. The broader one's understanding of the human experience, the better design we will have. Perspective is everything when you are experiencing the challenges of life. From an eternal perspective, the only death that is truly premature is the death of one who is not prepared to meet God. I've seen terrorism close up, but I don't live in a state of terror at all. I'm comfortable going to the Manhattan Thanksgiving Day Parade, the tree lighting at Rockefeller Center, Times Square on New Year's Eve. For perspective, the world today is a safer place than it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Airlift, World War II. Cubism was an attack on the perspective that had been known and used for 500 years. It was the first big change. It confused people. They said, things don't look like that. The real danger to the world's resistance movements is the attempt to distort reality and to place the blame on the resistance group's actions without allowing them to portray their perspective, thus ignoring the reality of the occupation and the siege, like the situation in occupied Palestine. Literature is always about bygone times. It's always looking back in time with a certain perspective. I look at bygone life which no longer exists, and as I said, I look at it without nostalgia but without anger either. I look at it with criticism and with compassion. I look at it with curiosity. Perspective is not a science but a hope. Try to see things differently. It's the only way to get a clearer perspective on the world and on your life. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.